Hey guys. Tonight we slip into the dimly lit corridors of the Middle Ages, where the simple act of exchanging glances could spell trouble. Imagine yourself at a feast. The smell of roasted meat heavy in the air, torchlight flickering off stone walls, and the music of a single lute straining to be heard above the chatter. You notice her across the hall, or him, depending on where your heart leans, and suddenly the world narrows to that one forbidden glance. But here's the nightmare. Back then, love wasn't sweet. It was scandal. You could be caught, judged, and punished for simply letting your eyes linger too long. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week in this era. Netflix and texting are luxuries compared to the paranoia of a medieval crush. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and the time where you're listening. I love knowing where this sleepy little community stretches across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a cautious step closer to the imagined Great Hall. Everyone around you is dressed in heavy wool and stiff linen, the air perfumed with sweat and smoke. At first, it feels like just another evening gathering, but beneath the laughter, you sense a tension that prickles your skin. Because here, in this medieval world, love between boys and girls isn't a romantic adventure, it's a danger zone. One wrong smile, one glance too long, and rumors could ripple through the crowd like spilled ale. You can almost hear the whispers. Did you see them? Eyes locked, as if they've already sinned. The truth is, this fear wasn't paranoia, it was policy. Families guarded their children's reputations like treasure chests. Because alliances, dowries, and inheritance hinged on appearances. Falling in love on your own terms was about as practical as trying to send a TikTok from a stone tower with no Wi-Fi. In fact, some chroniclers wrote of young nobles who tried to follow their hearts, only to be banished to convents or forced into marriages with strangers twice their age. Not exactly the fairy tale ending. But here's the odd twist. While society condemned open romance, people couldn't stop yearning. The heart has a funny way of ignoring the rulebook. There are letters tucked in dusty archives where nobles describe their secret thrills. The brush of a hand during a dance. A fleeting look across the pews at Mass. For us, that might feel like background detail. For them, it was an adrenaline rush. Historians still argue whether these fleeting moments meant more to them than modern love does to us. Because scarcity often heightens desire. Picture yourself trying to hide this kind of excitement. You might tuck a flower into your sleeve, its meaning understood only by the recipient, or slip a note, written in clumsy Latin, into the folds of a cloak. One mistake, though, and you'd better be ready for the medieval equivalent of being cancelled, public shame. Family disgrace, even legal consequences. Love wasn't just a personal risk, it could unravel dynasties. Of course, this didn't stop the poets. Courtly love became the subject of endless verses, knights pining for ladies they could never touch. Singers crafting tales of passion doomed from the start. And while most of those songs ended in longing rather than happy ever after, they offered a way for people to live their feelings in art. Even when reality chained them down. It's not so different from teenagers today writing angsty lyrics in notebooks, except back then. The stakes were far higher. And yet, despite the fear, despite the punishments, people still dared to look, to feel, to risk, because what else could they do? Love isn't a guest that politely waits outside until society says it's welcome. It barges in, muddy boots and all, and in the Middle Ages. It did so in candlelit halls, behind church doors, and beneath the shadow of tapestries. Each forbidden glance was both a spark and a danger, a whisper of humanity against a backdrop of control. Even now, as you breathe in the slow rhythm of the story, you can almost sense the weight of those eyes meeting yours across the centuries. And you realize, if love was a nightmare back then, maybe that's what made it so unforgettable. You linger in that great hall, but the night stretches on, and the danger of one glance shifts into something even more exhausting: chaperones. Every step you take, every word you whisper, someone is hovering nearby. Imagine you're trying to have a conversation with someone you like, but there's always a watchful aunt standing right behind you, her ears sharper than any medieval dagger. Privacy? Forget it. In this world, affection came pre-packaged with supervision, like a smartphone app that won't work unless your parents approve the download. The custom of constant oversight was no accident. Families guarded daughters like they were prized relics, their futures wrapped up in marriage contracts worth more than farmland. Even the simplest walk in the garden wasn't innocent. It needed a companion to make sure nothing improper took root among the roses. You might think sneaking a hand squeeze under a table would be harmless. But here, it could cost someone's honor. And honor was a currency far more fragile than coin. It wasn't just noble families either. Across villages, people gossiped with such speed it makes you wonder if medieval towns had their own version of social media, just minus the hashtags. A look held too long in public could spiral into rumors overnight. Suddenly, the baker's daughter belongs to someone she only smiled at once. These stories weren't easily erased, because reputations could cling like soot on stone walls. And here's the odd fact: sometimes, those watchful chaperones weren't just silent guards, they actively joined the game. Some acted as intermediaries, carrying messages or arranging safe moments for couples to talk. The very people who enforced control could also bend the rules if bribed with enough honey, bread, or flattery. Historians still debate whether these helpers were romantic sympathizers or just opportunists with an eye for favors. You can almost feel the claustrophobia now. Imagine sitting in a dim chamber, trying to whisper across the room, but the sound of shuffling feet reminds you that someone is always there. It's like trying to have a secret conversation with your phone on speaker mode. No one misses a word. And yet, people still tried. Lovers developed signals. A tap on the goblet meant, "I'm thinking of you." A dropped handkerchief meant, "Meet me near the chapel." You'd need nerves of steel to play this game. Because discovery meant disgrace. Think about it. Romance wasn't just about butterflies in the stomach. It was strategy, espionage, and endurance. You're not swooning in candlelight. You're calculating who's watching, where to stand, and how to make a stolen glance look like a coincidence. It's romance turned into a chess match. Checkmate came in the form of a ruined reputation. The church, of course, cheered on the watchful eyes. For them, love outside approved marriages was a slippery slope into sin. Better to have an army of relatives and neighbors spying than risk scandal. And so, affection lived in the cracks, between prayers. In crowded feasts. In the half-light where a glance might be mistaken for piety. As the hall fades in your mind, you feel how suffocating it must have been. Love wasn't just risky, it was smothered before it could breathe. Yet, somehow, it persisted, because even with guards at your side, even with gossip waiting to ignite, two people could still share a look that said more than 1,000 guarded words. That look alone could be the rebellion of a lifetime. The music of the feast fades, and you're carried deeper into the nightmare, marriage as politics. You quickly realize that in this medieval world, love has very little to do with marriage. It's not about hearts fluttering or sweet promises under the stars. It's about land, alliances, and power. Picture yourself as a pawn on a massive chessboard where kings and lords move you not for your happiness, but for the security of borders and the growth of estates. Romantic? Not quite. For noble families, a child's wedding was an investment deal with human faces. Your worth wasn't measured by your smile or wit, but by the number of sheep, barrels of grain, or acres of land your union could secure. A daughter might be promised to a stranger she'd never met, sometimes when she was still a child. A son might be wed to solidify a treaty, even if his bride lived hundreds of miles away. The love story here is less Romeo and Juliet, and more spreadsheet and contract. Oddly enough, medieval records show that people knew this was hollow. Chronicles and letters sometimes complain about loveless matches, painting them as burdens endured rather than joys celebrated. And yet, families insisted, because a marriage could forge alliances stronger than armies. One noble union might stop a war, another might ignite one. Love was too unpredictable to be trusted in such a high-stakes game. Of course, outside the noble courts, marriage still had its politics. Even peasants used marriages to merge plots of land or strengthen village ties. Imagine you're a farmer's child. Marrying the girl next door isn't just about affection. It's about connecting two families to share oxen, tools, and labor. Suddenly, even your household chickens are part of a negotiation. You thought Tinder bios were stressful? Try explaining your family's crop yields as your main selling point. And here's a strange truth. In some regions, marriages were arranged before children even understood the concept. Agreements were signed early, and the kids grew up knowing they were already claimed. Historians still argue whether this left room for affection to grow later, or if most couples simply accepted duty as their version of love. Some letters hint at warmth that blossomed over time, but others suggest quiet misery stretching across decades. You can feel the weight of it pressing down. Your life isn't yours. Your partner isn't chosen because they make you laugh or because you share a dream. They're chosen because their father commands a castle, or because their family can pay a hefty dowry. Love becomes the ghost at the feast, haunting the space between contracts. And yet, in the corners of this rigid system, people still dared to hope. Poets wrote of secret romances as if trying to plant seeds of rebellion. Troubadours sang ballads of forbidden passion in courtly halls, like sly reminders that hearts don't obey the same rules as treaties. Their songs were whispers against the thunder of politics, fragile but stubborn. As you lean into the quiet hum of the night, imagine yourself bound by this system, You might smile politely at the person you're told to marry. But in your chest, a longing grows for something real. And perhaps that longing itself, dangerous, impractical, unstoppable, was the only form of freedom people had. The ink on those marriage contracts barely dries before another layer of pressure falls on your shoulders: dowries and deals. In this medieval nightmare, love wasn't the currency. Gold, land, livestock, and promises were. When families discussed weddings, they weren't whispering about feelings or compatibility. They were calculating dowries the way modern accountants crunch numbers at tax season. If you were a daughter, your future depended on the weight of your dowry chest. The richer the gifts, the better the match: silk cloth, precious jewels, silver coins. These weren't just ornaments, they were bargaining chips that defined your value on the marriage market. Without a solid dowry, you risked being left behind. Or worse, shuffled into a convent because no one profitable wanted you. Not exactly a meet-cute moment from a rom-com. Oddly enough, the dowry wasn't just about giving, it was also a form of insurance. If the marriage soured, those goods might be her only protection against abandonment. But here's the twist. Sometimes husbands squandered the dowries anyway, gambling them away or using them to fund campaigns. Historians still debate how effective this safety net really was, since many women ended up powerless despite their families' careful negotiations. And then there's the bride price, the flip side of the bargain. In some regions, the groom's family paid to secure the bride. So, depending on where you lived, you were either bought or sold, or both. Imagine being discussed like a piece of medieval real estate. This parcel comes with fertile soil and good prospects for heirs. It's hard not to laugh bitterly at how unromantic it all was. Even peasants weren't free from the arithmetic of love. A cow here, a patch of land there, a cart for hauling firewood. Every union carried a price tag. Villagers talked about marriages the way we might compare mortgage rates. Except their deals decided who worked alongside whom in the fields for the rest of their lives. Picture it now. A grand hall full of stern faces. The bride's father haggling like a merchant in the market. The groom's kin calculating whether the arrangement is worth it. You, standing in the middle, are little more than a token passed between hands. No one asks if you like the person you're about to spend your life with. They only ask if the deal makes sense on parchment. Yet, love still found its cracks. Stories tell of couples who, despite being pawns in this economic game, built affection in stolen moments, after the ink dried, after the gifts were exchanged, when no one was watching. Sometimes the heart grew stubbornly in soil meant for profit, and sometimes it didn't, leaving people trapped in cold arrangements that lasted a lifetime. You can almost hear the echoes of those negotiations now. The shuffle of coin purses, the muttered arguments, the sigh of resignation from the bride or groom. Love, in this system, is reduced to numbers, and yet the ache for something more real lingers in the air, refusing to vanish completely. The haggling voices of dowries fade. And now you slip into a quieter corner of the medieval nightmare, the silent courtship. Love, when it dared to exist outside the ledgers and contracts, had to speak in whispers, symbols, and stolen glances. You can almost feel the tension in your chest as you imagine yourself seated in a drafty hall. Eyes darting, heart hammering, but lips sealed, Words were dangerous, silence was survival. Here's the strange part. Silence itself became a language. A knight might brush his cloak in a certain way to signal affection. A maiden might drop her veil just slightly. Not by accident but by careful design. Entire romances bloomed on the exchange of gestures so subtle you'd miss them if you blinked. It's like trying to fall in love through emojis only, but with the risk of imprisonment if you misuse the wrong one. Some nobles pushed the art further, crafting poetry that spoke in riddles. You'd read a stanza about a falcon, but know it meant longing, a line about spring rain, but understand it meant desire. These verses circulated secretly, folded into sleeves or hidden beneath prayer books. To the casual eye, they were harmless art. To the intended reader, they were confessions hotter than the hearthfire. Historians still debate whether such poetry was tolerated as just art, or whether it was a dangerous form of coded rebellion. Even letters written in plain Latin became weapons of secrecy. Lovers used strange metaphors or religious phrases to cloak their intent. Imagine reading a line like, "May God grant you light as you walk through the shadows," which sounds pious enough. But the addressee knows it means, "I miss you. Meet me at dusk." A slip of parchment like that could carry both bliss and doom. And if words failed, there were gifts. A sprig of rosemary meant remembrance. A small carved token could carry the weight of an unspoken vow. A simple ribbon tied to a lance or tucked into armor became a declaration. You can almost picture the trembling fingers that passed these objects in crowded halls, pretending to exchange something mundane while hearts raced with the thrill of danger. But silent courtship was not for the faint of heart. The effort to conceal love created paranoia. Was that message intercepted? Did someone see you brush against his hand? The wrong glance could spark suspicion, and suspicion could destroy reputations. For you, living in this time, love isn't butterflies, it's a high-wire act, balancing between longing and fear. The irony? All this silence gave birth to a louder culture of gossip. Because when people can't see what's happening, they fill in the blanks themselves. Villagers, courtiers, even clergy invented stories, weaving half-truths into full scandals. And sometimes, those rumors became more destructive than the actual romances. Still, lovers persevered, because to say nothing at all, to keep every feeling locked inside, was a slower kind of death. So they took the risk. They whispered in shadows. They exchanged coded glances. They dared to trust the silence. It's haunting to think that some of history's deepest affections were never spoken. Only breathed in secrecy, then carried away like smoke from a candle. And you, resting in the quiet hum of this story, can feel that silence pressing close. It's heavy, charged, almost electric. For them, it was the only way love could survive, even if it meant never hearing the words aloud. The hush of secret glances and coded gifts soon collides with a wall larger than any castle, the church itself. In the Middle Ages, desire wasn't simply frowned upon. It was actively policed by men in robes who claimed authority over both body and soul. You imagine walking into a stone chapel, the air cool and heavy with incense, your heart fluttering not from prayer but from the memory of someone's smile. The problem? Here, that flutter could brand you a sinner. The church's grip was ironclad. Love outside marriage was classified as lust, and lust as sin. Even the smallest gestures of attraction, handholding, a kiss in the shadows, were dragged into the confessional, where priests demanded you spill your heart's secrets. People confessed with trembling voices, sometimes exaggerating their guilt just to cleanse themselves. You can almost hear the whispered admissions, "Father, forgive me, I longed for him in the garden." The reply? Stern warnings, penance, and often shame. Oddly enough, the Church's obsession with regulating desire produced its own contradictions. Clergy themselves sometimes broke the rules, slipping into relationships they condemned from the pulpit. Records tell of priests with secret lovers, bishops with households suspiciously full of servants, and even monks caught in affairs. Historians still debate how widespread this hypocrisy was, but the tension is undeniable. The louder the Church preached chastity, the more cracks appeared in its own facade. And the rules were dizzying. The Church dictated not just who you could love, but when. Certain days were forbidden for intimacy, Lent, Advent, even Sundays. Imagine needing a liturgical calendar just to know when you're allowed to kiss your spouse. For couples already struggling under arranged marriages, these restrictions felt like a cruel joke. It's one thing to lack love, it's another to have even affection rationed by the clergy. To keep people pure, sermons painted desire as a monstrous force. Illustrations in manuscripts showed demons whispering into lovers' ears, twisting their affection into temptation. It's like the medieval version of scare campaigns. But instead of, "Don't do drugs," the message was, "Don't even think about kissing." The fear seeped deep, making people question their own hearts. Yet, desire doesn't vanish just because someone declares it forbidden. Lovers still wrote their letters, still risked their meetings, still found ways to bypass the moral watchdogs. Some even turned to confession not as punishment, but as strategy, subtly hinting at their feelings in hopes of easing their guilt. As if the act of speaking aloud made the secret less heavy. The irony? In trying to suppress love, the Church gave it sharper edges, making it feel both sinful and thrilling. And then there were the stories, moral tales, preached from pulpits, warned of young men and women destroyed by desire. But hidden between the lines, those same stories sometimes revealed just how irresistible love was. Even in parables designed to frighten, affection glowed like embers, refusing to die. You can almost feel it now, the clash between soft human longing and rigid divine decree. The Church tried to silence passion with bells and sermons, but every stolen glance, every trembling touch, rang louder than any hymn. For you, lying here in the calm hum of the night, it's clear, love in the Middle Ages wasn't just risky. It was heretical. From the heavy hand of the Church, you drift toward the open air of tournament fields and castle courts, where another strange chapter of the medieval nightmare unfolds, the knightly love codes. Here, love wasn't free, but it was wrapped in ritual, poetry, and a set of unwritten rules so rigid it almost felt like a game invented to keep passion busy while never letting it bloom. You picture yourself at a joust, banners fluttering, trumpets blaring, horses snorting in the chill morning air. A knight lowers his lance, not just to win glory, but to win the favor of a lady watching from the gallery. But here's the catch: many times, that lady wasn't his wife. Courtly love often demanded that knights devote themselves to unattainable women, ideally already married to someone else. It sounds bizarre, like a medieval version of having a celebrity crush, except with real risks attached. The code itself was spelled out in poems, treatises, even mock laws of love. Knights were expected to serve their chosen lady with loyalty, secrecy, and humility. They had to endure suffering as proof of devotion, turning heartache into a badge of honor. Imagine someone today saying, "The fact that she ignores me makes my love pure." It's equal parts tragic and absurd. But that was the medieval ideal. Historians still debate whether these codes reflected real relationships or were simply a literary game. A way to make chivalry look glamorous. Some argue that knights genuinely courted ladies this way, sneaking poems and songs through castle corridors. Others insist it was all performance, stories meant to entertain rather than document reality. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between, tangled in both ink and whispers. Of course, the suffering was intentional. A knight wasn't supposed to win his lady's heart easily. Longing was the point, pain was the proof. The more impossible the love, the more noble it seemed. It's like the medieval world collectively decided that romance should be a diet of sighs and hunger. With no dessert allowed, you'd be starving emotionally, but everyone around you would nod and say, "Ah yes, that's true devotion." And the comedy? Some laws of love were almost laughable. One text declared that love couldn't exist between married couples. Marriage was about duty. Love was about yearning elsewhere. Imagine that being your cultural norm. Your spouse is your partner. But your real love must be someone out of reach. If your eyebrows just shot up, you're not alone. Still, the ideals seeped into culture. Troubadours sang about knights who pined for distant ladies, weaving tales that spread across Europe. Castles echoed with songs of impossible affection, while real men and women tried to squeeze their messy, human emotions into these polished, impractical molds. And you, wandering through this world, sense how exhausting it must have been. Love turned into a performance graded by society. Yet, beneath the costumes and codes, people were still human. Sometimes, a knight's devotion to a lady tipped into scandal. Sometimes, poems of longing weren't just art but confessions. And sometimes, the game slipped into reality, causing chaos when hearts refused to follow rules written by poets. So here you are, leaning into the soft hum of the night, realizing that medieval love wasn't just forbidden, it was choreographed. And the dance, however beautiful in its poetry, often ended with aching feet and weary souls. The delicate dance of knightly codes cannot last forever. And soon you feel the sharp sting of reality. What happens when people are caught stepping outside the rules? Punished for romance. That's the grim refrain. You might think a stolen kiss is harmless. Or a letter tucked into a sleeve is just ink and parchment. But in the Middle Ages, discovery meant disgrace. And disgrace often came with a very real whip. Imagine yourself standing in a crowded marketplace. The air thick with the smell of bread, manure, and wood smoke. Two young lovers have been discovered sneaking out after curfew. Their punishment? Public humiliation, sometimes a flogging, sometimes being paraded through town with mocking songs shouted at them. You can hear the laughter. But it's not kind laughter. It's the sound of a community making sure no one else dares to repeat the crime of romance. and punishments varied wildly. A noble caught in an affair might be exiled or forced into a political marriage meant to erase the scandal. A peasant, by contrast, might be fined, beaten, or simply shamed until their reputation never recovered. In some cases, women bore the harsher end of the stick. One town record tells of a young woman forced to wear a shorn head as proof of her sin. Men often slipped away with lighter sentences. Historians still argue whether the law itself was biased or whether communities simply punished women more harshly to protect family honor. The church joined in, of course. Being caught in romance outside marriage could mean penance, days of fasting, public prayers, sometimes long pilgrimages across dangerous roads. You can almost feel the weight of it. Your heart leads you into tenderness. And suddenly you're trudging barefoot for miles. All to prove your devotion not to love, but to rules. Oddly, the severity sometimes backfired. The more forbidden love became, the more thrilling it felt. Lovers treated the risks as part of the adventure. Slipping into barns or gardens with a thrill that no modern rom-com could capture. Each kiss stolen under threat of punishment carried the intensity of a secret rebellion. And maybe, in some twisted way, punishment gave romance its fire. Still, the fear was real. The wrong rumor could cost you everything: home, family, even life. Kings ordered executions for adultery among nobles when politics demanded it. Commoners sometimes suffered the brutal cucking stool, dunked repeatedly in water to shame them for illicit love. It wasn't just about the act, it was about control. Love was dangerous because it wasn't predictable. And societies built on order couldn't tolerate unpredictability. Picture yourself back in that square, watching the punishment unfold. You feel a knot in your stomach, a chill running down your back. The lesson is clear. Love in this time isn't a gentle breeze. It's a storm that can topple your world if noticed. And yet, people still dared. Because to live without risking punishment was, in its own way, a prison. So as you rest now, hearing the hum of the night, you understand, medieval romance was never soft or safe. It was a gamble, a fire burning beneath eyes that watched too closely. Always one misstep away from ruin. The punishments echo in your ears. But the story slides into even stranger territory: nuns and forbidden love. You picture a quiet convent, its stone walls thick, its halls filled with the rustle of habits and the scent of beeswax candles. It seems safe, serene, holy, but beneath the chanting and the prayers, desire still found cracks to slip through. You wouldn't expect love to bloom in such cloistered soil. Yet it did, clandestine, fragile, and endlessly risky. Nuns, bound by vows of chastity, were supposed to be married to God. Theoretically, that made them untouchable, removed from the messy world of passion. In reality, they were still human, with hearts that beat and eyes that wandered. Letters survive, written by nuns to priests or noblemen, confessing affections that burned hotter than the incense at Mass. Some are tender, others desperate, a few shockingly bold. Historians still debate whether these were rare exceptions or if convents quietly sheltered many secret romances. And sometimes, the love wasn't with outsiders, it was within the convent walls themselves. Women living in such close quarters formed deep emotional bonds, some of which crossed into intimacy. Chroniclers hint at scandals hushed up, punishments handed down, entire convents investigated when rumors spread. You can almost feel the tension, devotion to God in one breath, longing for a forbidden touch in the next. The Church, predictably, reacted with horror. Punishments ranged from stricter confinement to outright expulsion. A nun caught in an affair could lose everything, her vows, her safety, her reputation. Yet the very existence of these scandals proves how futile control really was. Even walls meant to shut out the world couldn't banish the pull of affection. One curious fact: some convents became known as havens of relative freedom, where noble families sent their daughters not out of piety but as a way to avoid costly marriages. In such places, women sometimes found themselves with more independence than they ever would have had as wives. Within that independence, the seeds of romance occasionally sprouted, even if it meant bending or breaking vows. You imagine yourself pacing the cloister garden at dusk, the fading light painting the sky orange and violet. Another nun passes you, her eyes lingering just a moment too long, a moment that says more than words ever could. The air feels charged, both holy and dangerous. It's the same nightmare of love in the Middle Ages. But here it plays out in whispers beneath stained glass. And yet, the humanity of it all shines through. These women weren't simply rule breakers. They were seekers of connection in a world that denied them choice. Their longing makes them feel closer to us across the centuries, reminding you that desire doesn't vanish with vows. As you breathe in the quiet of your own night, you sense how universal this struggle is. Even in convents where silence reigned, love still hummed like a hidden chord, vibrating against the stone, waiting to be felt. The convent doors close behind you, and now you drift into an even stranger corner of the medieval nightmare: love potions and magic. When reality smothered desire, people turned to sorcery, desperate to twist fate with herbs, charms, and whispered spells. You picture yourself in a shadowed market stall, candles flickering over bundles of dried plants. A hunched woman leans close, offering a vial that smells of roses and vinegar, claiming it will make someone love you forever. Would you drink it? In the Middle Ages, many did. Recipes for love potions appear in manuscripts scattered across Europe. Wine mixed with herbs like basil or wormwood. Powders ground from strange stones. Even animal parts. Some were harmless, like honey and cinnamon stirred into ale. Others were risky, involving toxic plants that might make the object of your affection sick, or worse. Historians still debate whether these recipes were genuine attempts at chemistry or symbolic rituals meant to calm anxious hearts. Either way, they prove just how far people would go to bend love to their will. It wasn't just drinks. Amulets carved with runes, rings etched with secret prayers, or belts tied with knots were believed to kindle desire. Imagine slipping a charm under your beloved's pillow, hoping the magic would seep into their dreams. For peasants who lacked wealth or noble status, magic felt like the only chance to compete with dowries and political alliances. It was the underdog's weapon in the battlefield of romance. But the Church, of course, saw danger. To them, these potions were devil's tools, and using them meant risking your soul. Trials survive in court records, where women, and sometimes men, were accused of witchcraft for brewing or carrying love charms. Some were fined, others beaten, a few executed. You can almost hear the terrified denials. It was only herbs for tea. Not a spell, yet suspicion clung tighter than smoke. Ironically, priests themselves sometimes wrote down recipes, not as endorsements, but as warnings. One text describes a concoction made with bird hearts and strange powders, noting that people believed it could enslave a lover's will. Whether the writer condemned or secretly experimented, no one can say. Historians still argue if these manuals were more about control than genuine prohibition. The belief in love magic wasn't limited to common folk. Nobles, too, dabbled in charms. Rumors swirled around queens and mistresses accused of enchanting kings, using spells to secure their positions. When rulers made foolish decisions, people whispered that magic, not love, was to blame. It was easier to believe a king bewitched than a king simply besotted. Picture yourself walking through a medieval street at night, the moonlight pale on the cobblestones. Somewhere, a young girl hides a pouch of herbs under her cloak. Somewhere else, a man swallows a bitter draught before daring to speak to the woman he longs for. The air feels thick with hope and fear, because every sip, every charm, could be salvation or ruin. And beneath it all is the same truth. People longed for love so fiercely. They would gamble with poison and risk their souls. Even in a world of contracts and punishments, they reached for magic, as if the heart's desire might be stronger than law, stronger than sin, even stronger than death. The scent of bitter herbs fades, and you step into a darker shadow of the medieval nightmare, the tragedy of adultery. Love potions might have been playful or hopeful, but adultery was deadly serious. In a society where marriage was contract, alliance, and reputation all wrapped together, breaking faith wasn't just betrayal, it was treason against the social order. Imagine yourself in a bustling town square, cobblestones slick with rain, where whispers curl like smoke. Someone has been caught in the act. The punishment? It varies, but none of the options are kind. A noblewoman might be locked away in a tower, her reputation shredded beyond repair. A peasant could face public whipping or worse. And in the harshest cases, lovers were executed, burned, drowned, or hanged, as if passion itself were a crime deserving death. And yet, adultery happened everywhere. The same nobles who arranged cold political marriages often sought warmth elsewhere. Kings kept mistresses in gilded chambers, while queens sometimes risked their crowns for a taste of affection. The irony is impossible to miss. The higher the rank, the more dangerous the fall. Court chronicles are riddled with scandals where one reckless embrace shifted the fate of kingdoms. Historians still argue whether some wars were sparked less by politics and more by wounded pride over illicit love. But beyond the courts, ordinary men and women took the same risks. A wife left lonely by a husband off at war. A husband dissatisfied with a loveless match. Human hearts rebelled against duty. The danger only seemed to make the moments more intoxicating. Picture two figures meeting in a barn, hay sticking to their clothes, every creak of wood threatening exposure. It's not glamorous, but it's electric, because one misstep could destroy them. The church, unsurprisingly, thundered against adultery. Sermons warned that straying love doomed souls to eternal fire. Confessionals filled with guilty voices, some seeking forgiveness, Others perhaps just wanting to whisper their secret out loud. And yet the louder the condemnation, the more stories of affairs slipped through the cracks. People risked everything, status, land, even life, just to feel something real in a world of arranged matches. Oddly enough, some communities treated adultery with theatrical flair. Records tell of lovers paraded through streets, forced to wear ridiculous costumes, mocked until their dignity vanished. Others faced the infamous cucking stool, dunked repeatedly in rivers until onlookers were satisfied. Medieval justice loved a public spectacle. It wasn't just about punishment, but about entertainment, a grim kind of theater. And for all its brutality, the pattern never stopped. Love kept breaking through contracts, oaths, and fear. Maybe it's because the heart doesn't calculate risk the way the mind does. Or maybe it's because in a world where everything, your marriage, your fortune, your future, was decided for you, choosing someone in secret was the only act of freedom left. As you rest now, letting the story hum around you, you can feel the weight of that choice. Adultery wasn't just a betrayal, it was a rebellion. One that could end in tragedy. But one people embraced anyway. Because even when the price was death, the promise of love was too tempting to resist. The barn doors close behind you, and suddenly you're swept into gilded chambers where the stakes are higher than any village scandal, royal love affairs. If adultery among common folk was dangerous, among kings and queens it was dynamite. Every whisper, every tryst, every rumor had the power to topple dynasties. You can almost hear the hush in the throne room, courtiers leaning in, gossip passing like wildfire under the flicker of torches. Kings, with all their power, rarely stopped at one partner. Mistresses became almost an institution, some wielding more influence than ministers of state. Imagine being a subject and watching royal decrees shift not because of strategy, but because the king's current favorite batted her eyelashes. It sounds absurd, yet records show mistresses deciding wars, taxes, even who lived or died at court. Historians still argue whether these women were victims of circumstance or savvy players using the only tools available in a world that left them little choice. Queens, meanwhile, walked a knife's edge. A king's affair might be tolerated, even expected, but a queen's? That was scandal enough to spark treason charges. Some queens risked it anyway. Catherine the Great centuries later became infamous for lovers. But even in the Middle Ages, stories whispered of queens meeting knights in gardens, or confessing too much affection to a courtier. For them, passion was a gamble where losing meant not shame but execution. Think of Eleanor of Aquitaine, though not always guilty of the rumors. She was accused of dalliances that rocked kingdoms. Or Isabella of France, whose political and personal entanglements set England ablaze. Every royal romance, true or invented, carried the weight of armies behind it. A king's sigh could change alliances. A queen's blush could be painted as treachery. Oddly enough, some royal affairs were almost celebrated. A charismatic mistress might be adored by the people, sung about in poems, painted into art. Others were despised, blamed for every misfortune. You can picture it. A crowd outside a castle chanting the mistress's name, either in admiration or fury, while she peers from behind silk curtains, knowing her fate is as fragile as a candle flame. And then there were the letters. Royal archives preserve notes between monarchs and their lovers, some tender, some shockingly blunt, a reminder that even the most powerful figures of their age were still just people yearning for connection. You can almost smile at the thought. Kings who commanded armies reduced to scribbling love notes like awkward teenagers. Yet danger lingered in every word. If intercepted, those letters became weapons. Enemies at court waited eagerly to twist passion into treason. Love wasn't private, it was a battlefield. Fought not only with glances and embraces but with spies, rumors, and plots. So you lie here now, listening to the hum of the night, and realize that for royals, love was never personal. It was political theater. Its tragedies and triumphs played out on the grandest stage. And still, they risked it, because even crowned heads couldn't silence the oldest desire of all. Jeweled chambers fade, and you find yourself back in the muddy lanes of a medieval village, peasant huts clustered together. Smoke curling lazily from thatched roofs. Here, the air smells of earth, wood smoke, and livestock. Life is harsh, work endless, yet even in this simple world, love refuses to stay quiet. Peasants' secret bonds may not make the chronicles of kings, but they carried just as much risk, just as much heartbreak. By day, these villagers bent their backs in the fields, their hands blistered from plowing or weaving. But when dusk fell, when chores were done and shadows deepened, hearts stirred. Young men lingered at the well a little longer, hoping to catch a smile. Women hummed songs while kneading bread, the tune carrying a hidden meaning only one listener understood. It was quiet, fragile, and dangerous, because even among the poor, marriage was still a contract. And love outside it was scandal. Oddly enough, records show that peasants often had more flexibility than nobles, simply because there was less land or power at stake. But that didn't mean freedom. Parents arranged matches, sometimes sealing them with nothing more than a handshake and a promise of shared goats. If you dared to follow your heart instead of your family's bargain, you could tear apart alliances that held a village together. Historians still argue how often peasants managed to marry for love, but hints of rebellion show up in court records, where couples defended their choice even against furious parents. And the secrecy was thick. Lovers snuck into barns after curfew, their steps muffled on straw. Some carved initials into wooden beams, hidden among farm tools. Others met during church festivals, the one place young men and women could mingle under the eyes of the entire community. Picture it: a Saints' Day feast, music playing, everyone dancing in circles, yet in the quick clasp of hands, in the brush of shoulders. Messages of love passed faster than wine, but danger always lingered. Gossip in a small village spread faster than fire on dry thatch. One overheard laugh, one late-night absence, and suddenly tongues wagged. The accused might be hauled before the local lord, fined for impropriety, or even forced to marry quickly to erase suspicion. And if the match didn't suit the families, then the punishment could be harsher still. Some stories end tenderly, with couples marrying after secret courtships. Others end in sorrow, lovers separated, one sent to another village, the other forced into an unwanted union. For peasants, love was not just fragile, it was often crushed beneath the weight of survival. And yet, it persisted. Imagine yourself leaning against the rough timber of a cottage wall, hearing the faint laughter of two young people sneaking away into the night. Their world is small, their chances slim, but their courage enormous. In their secret bonds, you see the same yearning that burned in castles and convents, the universal ache to be chosen, not traded. And as you rest here, wrapped in the hum of the story, you realize, whether cloaked in silk or clothed in rags, people risked everything for a taste of love, and that risk made even the smallest moment shimmer like gold. The muddy village path dissolves, and suddenly you're swept into a noble hall alive with music and laughter. This is the stage of courtly love theater. Here, romance didn't just hide in shadows or behind gossip, it strutted out in costume. Masked in poetry, and wrapped in performance, you can almost hear the pluck of lutes, the echo of footsteps on stone floors, and the murmur of an audience that knows every gesture carries more meaning than it admits. Courtly entertainment was never just about fun. Troubadours and minstrels sang ballads of longing knights and unattainable ladies, their lyrics dripping with double meanings. Nobles laughed politely, but everyone knew the truth. These songs were often mirrors of real feelings flickering through the hall. Imagine a night, eyes fixed on a lady as the singer croons about impossible love. An entire room witnesses the performance. Yet only two people feel the sting of its secret. Plays, too, became disguises for romance. Actors staged tales of foolish husbands, clever wives, and daring lovers. The audience roared at the comedy. But tucked within the laughter was recognition. Some couples even slipped coded messages through the scripts, arranging scenes so they could steal a glance without suspicion. Historians still debate whether audiences tolerated these layers knowingly, or if most were blissfully unaware of the sparks flying just off stage. Even dance played its role. At feasts, reels and carols brought men and women together in carefully structured patterns. But within the steps, hands brushed, eyes met, hearts quickened. Think of it as the medieval version of texting under the dinner table, obvious if you looked closely, but easy to pass off as nothing more than rhythm and fun. Yet the theater of love was risky. A misplaced lyric, a poorly timed glance, could unravel reputations. Musicians who played too boldly risked punishment for fueling scandal. And participants walked a tightrope, balancing between performance and reality. You can feel it now, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Every laugh layered with suspicion. Every cheer laced with doubt. And here's the irony. The church often condemned such entertainments as frivolous or sinful. But nobles adored them. After all, what better way to vent suppressed emotions than by cloaking them in art? A troubadour's song could say what a knight dared not. A play could act out what a lady only dreamed of. It was therapy disguised as festivity. Picture yourself leaning at the back of the hall, torchlight glimmering across the stage. You watch a performer sing of a love so pure it hurts. And you notice two figures in the audience sitting a little too close. Their smiles too carefully hidden. For everyone else, it's theater. For them, it's confession. And as you listen to the faint hum of the night around you now, you understand, courtly love theater was more than entertainment. It was a mask, a mirror, and sometimes a rebellion, letting people taste forbidden feelings under the safe veil of performance. The torchlight of the hall dims, and you find yourself in a quieter, more suffocating corner of the medieval nightmare, the virgin ideal. In this world, purity wasn't just prized, it was demanded, elevated to an almost sacred currency. A woman's worth was often measured not by her wit, her kindness, or her skills, but by whether she remained untouched. You can almost feel the weight of it pressing down, as if the air itself insists on silence, restraint, and fear. From the pulpit, priests thundered that chastity was holy. That virginity was the crown jewel of any maiden. Families guarded daughters with the zeal of dragon keepers, because a single rumor of impropriety could destroy prospects for marriage. It wasn't only about reputation, it was economics, politics, and power. A daughter without virginity could mean a lost alliance, a reduced dowry, a stain on the family name. The obsession ran so deep that bizarre customs grew around it. Some households employed older women or servants as constant companions to ensure no temptation occurred. Others relied on ritual inspections, as if purity could be proven like coin tested for silver. You shudder at the thought. The most private part of life turned into public proof. A young girl's body reduced to a document in negotiations. Historians still argue how widespread these practices truly were. But the fear they reveal is undeniable. Ironically, men were rarely held to the same standard. A nobleman could dally, a knight could boast of adventures, and society often looked the other way. Meanwhile, women were expected to arrive at marriage as pure as fresh snow. If she didn't, she bore the shame alone. No matter how complicit the man might have been, it's the kind of double standard that makes you want to roll your eyes so hard you'd be burned at the stake for witchcraft. Even art and literature joined in. Manuscripts praised maidens who preserved their honor like treasures, comparing them to locked gardens or flawless gems. Troubadour songs idealized unattainable ladies, often stressing their purity as part of their beauty. The contradiction is sharp. They longed for women who never yielded, yet desired them all the same. And yet, in quiet corners, people resisted. Some women cleverly manipulated the ideal, using their virtue as bargaining power, stalling suitors, or gaining leverage in negotiations. Others embraced secrecy, hiding relationships until marriage forced the matter into the open. Virginity wasn't just a burden, it could also be wielded as a tool, though always under immense risk. Imagine yourself as a young maiden in this world, standing at a window as moonlight spills across the floor. Every decision you make, every smile, every word carries scrutiny. The silence of the night is heavy, reminding you that one slip could shatter your future. And yet, the ache of desire pulses quietly in your chest, reminding you that you are alive. As you breathe in the soft hum of the present moment, you realize how terrifying and fragile that ideal was. Purity wasn't just about the body, it was a trap set by society, binding women to silence while men wrote the rules. And still, somehow, love slipped through, in stolen glances and trembling hands, defying even the strictest cages. The image of the locked garden fades, and now you're drawn into the hush of a small, stone confessional, the place where lust itself became a crime to be whispered. In the Middle Ages, desire was not just frowned upon, it was catalogued, categorized, and punished with penance. You can almost hear the echo of footsteps on cold chapel floors. The scrape of a wooden stool. The low murmur of a priest waiting for you to reveal the secrets of your heart. Imagine leaning forward in the dark, the scent of incense sharp in your nose, and admitting what you've barely admitted to yourself, that you dreamed of someone's touch, that you longed for the sound of their voice. Here, even thoughts were treated as sins. The church didn't just police what you did, it claimed dominion over what you imagined. For you, in this world, even your daydreams were crimes. Confessors kept manuals that listed every possible temptation, from kisses stolen in corners to fantasies never acted upon. Some guides were shockingly detailed, which has led historians to debate whether priests were trying to prevent sin or just writing the medieval equivalent of scandalous novels. Still, the effect was chilling. If you thought too much about someone, you were guilty. If you felt a flutter in your chest, you carried shame. And the punishments weren't always physical, they were spiritual, emotional, exhausting. You might be ordered to fast, to recite endless prayers, to walk barefoot in pilgrimage until your feet bled. The goal was not only to cleanse but to teach you that desire itself was dangerous. Imagine being told that the very warmth in your chest was evidence of corruption. You'd leave the confessional lighter in one sense, but burdened in another, always aware that your heart was a battlefield. Yet here's the irony. Confessions of lust created a strange intimacy of their own. Some priests heard so many tales of longing that they became unwilling witnesses to half the romances in their parish. A whispered story of desire might, in its own way, be the first time a secret love was spoken aloud. People left unburdened, but also exposed, their private affections suddenly known by another. And then there was hypocrisy. Records survive of confessors themselves falling into affairs with those who came seeking forgiveness. The very men meant to cleanse desire sometimes succumbed to it, tangled in the same web of secrecy they condemned. Historians still argue how often this happened, but the whispers are there, proof that even guardians of morality couldn't silence their own hearts. Picture yourself now, sitting in that wooden booth, voice trembling as you confess. The priest gives you penance. Maybe stern, maybe gentle. You leave, the chapel door creaking shut behind you. But the longing in your chest hasn't disappeared. It's still there, still pulsing, perhaps even stronger now that it's been named. And lying here, listening to the hum of the night, you realize how cruelly paradoxical it all was. To confess was to seek relief. Yet the relief came with deeper shame. Love in this world wasn't just dangerous, it was criminal. Stamped with guilt before it even began. The hush of the confessional fades. And suddenly you're thrust into a courtyard where steel glints in the morning sun. This is jealousy turned lethal. Where private whispers become public duels. In the Middle Ages, love was already a minefield. But when jealousy entered, it became open combat. You can almost hear the clang of swords, the shouts of bystanders, the raw pride that pushed men to fight over glances and rumors. Imagine this. 2 knights. Their tempers stoked by gossip. Square off before a crowd. One claims the other has stolen his lady's affection, or perhaps even just looked too long at her. The duel begins. Lances shatter, swords ring, and onlookers cheer as if watching sport. But this isn't a tournament prize, it's love. Twisted into bloodshed. In a society where reputation meant survival, jealousy was often answered with steel. Oddly enough, duels weren't limited to nobles. Even peasants sometimes took up cudgels or knives, settling disputes about who had rights to a woman's hand or her glance. Village records show men brawling outside taverns, bruises and broken bones serving as proof of devotion. Historians still argue whether these fights were truly about love, or whether love was just an excuse for men to assert dominance. Either way, jealousy lit sparks that often burned out of control. And women? They bore the worst of it. Their reputations were dragged through mud whether they were guilty or not. A woman accused of causing jealousy might be shamed, punished, or forced into a marriage not of her choosing, all because two men turned her into a prize. It's a bitter thought that affection could transform into violence, leaving her powerless in the very story she inspired. Even in the courts, jealousy was taken seriously. Legal cases sometimes included crimes of passion, where men defended themselves by claiming their honor had been provoked. Judges debated not only the law but the unwritten rules of masculinity. A duel fought for love might even be framed as noble, no matter how senseless it truly was. And here's the irony: while jealousy destroyed lives, it was also romanticized. Troubadours sang of knights so consumed by longing they risked everything in combat. Plays and poems painted jealous lovers as tragic heroes rather than fools. Society, in its strange way, celebrated the very impulse that caused so much misery. Picture yourself standing at the edge of one such duel. The crowd presses close, breath steaming in the cold air. You feel the tension coil in your stomach as swords flash. As one man stumbles, as another stands tall, chest heaving with pride. Was this love, or just ego dressed in romance's clothing? Either way, the cost was real: bruises, blood, and reputation scarred forever. And now, as you lie listening to the hum of the present night, you sense how fragile affection was in that age. It wasn't only forbidden, it was combustible. Jealousy turned secret glances into sparks, and sparks into fire. In the nightmare of medieval love, even the simple act of caring too much could end in blades. The clang of swords fades, and you find yourself in the quieter rustle of parchment, ink-stained fingers. Wax seals pressed in secret. Words hidden where eyes shouldn't wander. Welcome to Forbidden Letters, the lifeblood of medieval romance. If duels were loud declarations of jealousy, these letters were soft rebellions whispered on vellum. You can almost feel the weight of a folded slip of parchment tucked inside a cloak, carrying more risk than a soldier's blade. Imagine you're in a dim chamber, quill scratching against parchment by candlelight. You write not of treaties or grain accounts, but of longing, a heart that aches, a glance remembered, a hand you wish you could hold again. Every word is chosen carefully, dressed in metaphors, because if intercepted, your confession could become evidence. It's like passing notes in school, except instead of detention, discovery could mean exile, ruin, or even death. Some lovers grew astonishingly clever. They wrote in Latin so clumsy it seemed like pious prayer, hiding affection beneath scripture. Others used riddles, where only the intended reader could untangle the meaning. A line about hunting falcons might actually describe desire. A reference to spring rain might mean passion. Historians still argue how much of medieval poetry was genuine art and how much was coded longing smuggled into verse. And the delivery, oh, the delivery was its own gamble. Letters slipped into prayer books, tied to a servant's apron, or tucked beneath loaves of bread. Messengers were bribed with coins, wine, or favors, but trust was never certain. Imagine handing over a note that could cost your life, praying it wouldn't end up in the wrong hands. The suspense must have been unbearable. Not all letters survived, of course. Many were burned, torn, or swallowed by time, but the ones we do have reveal shocking tenderness, confessions of sleepless nights, aching hearts, playful jokes. Some are so intimate they read like whispers carried across centuries, voices breaking free from stone walls. You realize, lying here, that those ancient hearts weren't so different from ours. They just risked far more to say what we now send in a text at 2 a.m. Yet letters could destroy as easily as they could connect. In courts, intercepted notes became scandalous evidence. Lovers betrayed by their own handwriting were forced to defend themselves under oath. Their words twisted into weapons. It's chilling to imagine your deepest secret read aloud by a sneering judge. Every phrase now proof of sin. And still, people wrote, because silence was heavier. A heart locked away entirely could suffocate. But a letter, no matter how risky, let desire breathe. Even if it was just a scrap of parchment hidden in a sleeve. It carried the weight of rebellion, of defiance against a world that said love was a crime. Picture yourself receiving one of these forbidden notes. Your hands tremble as you break the wax seal, your eyes scanning hurried lines that make your chest swell. For a moment, the world softens, danger fades, and all that exists is the voice of someone who sees you. That moment, however brief, was worth everything. The fragile whispers of ink fade, and now you're thrust into the awkward, suffocating spectacle of arranged first nights. In the medieval world, marriage wasn't just a private contract between two people. It was often a public event. And even the consummation could carry the weight of ceremony. You can almost feel the chill of stone walls as you imagine being shoved into a bedchamber. Not for intimacy, but for duty, while curious eyes linger just outside the door. For nobles, the first night was about proof. Families demanded evidence that the marriage was sealed, that heirs would one day follow. In some cases, witnesses literally escorted the couple to bed, offering blessings or smirks before withdrawing. Sometimes they didn't withdraw at all. Records tell of attendants lingering nearby, listening for sounds that confirmed duty had been done. It's the kind of detail that makes you wince. Privacy here wasn't just rare, it was unthinkable. And when proof was needed, bedsheets became evidence. A stained sheet might be proudly displayed the next morning as validation of the bride's virginity and the union's legitimacy. Failure to produce such proof sparked suspicion, gossip, even annulments. Imagine waking up not to breakfast in bed, but to a crowd waiting outside, eager to inspect your night's work. Historians still debate how widespread this ritual was, but the stories are enough to make modern minds squirm. Among peasants, the scene was less ceremonial but no less public. Village weddings often turned into long, rowdy feasts, where the newlyweds were escorted noisily to bed, with jokes, songs, and sometimes pranks. Friends might bang on the doors, pour ale beneath the threshold, or shout bawdy rhymes into the night. It was community theater at its most intrusive, reducing intimacy to comedy. And if the couple failed? Well, the shame could be brutal. A man who couldn't perform might be mocked for life. A woman suspected of not being pure could face humiliation or punishment. It wasn't about tenderness or discovery, it was about proof. Plain and cold. Oddly, some regions treated the first night as a blessing for fertility. Priests or elders prayed over the couple before they lay together, as though divine permission were required. Others treated it as superstition, with charms placed under pillows or herbs burned to ensure a successful union. The mix of sacred and absurd paints a strange picture. A night that should have been private turned into ritual theater for the sake of community and family honor. Picture yourself in that room, the weight of expectation pressing heavier than the blankets. You're supposed to feel desire, but all you feel is fear, fear of failure, fear of gossip, fear of being reduced to evidence. The flicker of candlelight offers no comfort when you know your entire future hinges on what happens, or doesn't happen, before dawn. As you lie here now, listening to the hum of the present night, the absurdity lingers. In the Middle Ages, even the most personal moment was never truly yours. Love was stripped down to proof and spectacle. A nightmare where privacy didn't exist. The sheets of proof are folded away. The laughter of villagers fades. And now you find yourself standing in the middle of a grand wedding hall. Candles blaze, choirs sing, banners hang heavy with color, but what you feel is emptiness. Weddings without love were the rule rather than the exception. A spectacle of wealth and duty where hearts had little say. You can almost hear the clatter of goblets, the drone of Latin vows, the clinking of coins beneath the celebration. For nobles, weddings were political theater. The bride might be dressed in silk and gold, the groom in armor polished until it gleamed. But beneath the finery, they were strangers. Sometimes they hadn't even exchanged a word before standing at the altar. Imagine saying, "I do," not out of affection but because your family signed a treaty. Historians still argue how many of these couples eventually grew fond of each other. But for many, affection never arrived, and peasants, though humbler, weren't free either. A village wedding often meant uniting two households, combining fields or herds. The bride and groom might share a dance, smile shyly, but everyone watching knew the real joy was in the exchange of assets. Love, if it came, had to sneak in after the vows. The rituals themselves could be oddly joyful on the surface. There were songs, feasts, dancing that lasted for hours. Children played under the tables. Dogs chased scraps, and ale flowed freely. To the crowd, it looked like happiness, but for the couple, it was often performance. Smiles held in place while their eyes betrayed nerves or resignation. You can almost feel the weight of those smiles, forced like masks at a masquerade. And then came the pressure. Once married, couples were expected to produce heirs quickly. A noblewoman's duty was to bear sons. A peasant woman's to provide strong workers. Failure wasn't seen as misfortune, it was seen as fault. Women especially bore the blame, accused of barrenness even when the truth was more complicated. Love, in these marriages, was less a dream than a footnote, an afterthought beneath the obligations of survival. Yet, strangely, not every story was bleak. Some couples, thrown together by arrangement, discovered tenderness over time. Letters from a few noble marriages revealed genuine affection that grew slowly, like ivy creeping across stone. But those were exceptions, cherished because they defied the rule. Most weddings ended with a sigh of duty, not a flutter of joy. Picture yourself as a guest at one of these weddings. You clap politely as vows are exchanged, sip wine from a pewter cup, and nod along to the music. Everyone is smiling, but if you look closer, the couple's eyes don't meet. Their hands touch only when forced. It's celebration on the outside, silence on the inside, and as you drift now in the soft hum of the night, you understand the cruelty of it. The medieval wedding, grand and loud, was often hollow at its core. Love wasn't the foundation, it was the ghost hovering at the edges, waiting to see if it would ever be invited inside. The empty smiles of the loveless wedding fade, and now you slip into the cool shadow of a church courtyard. Here, where sermons thundered against desire, another irony unfolds: priests as matchmakers. The very men sworn to guard morality sometimes became the quiet brokers of romance, nudging couples together in ways that defied both law and logic. Picture a weary parish priest in a small village. He knows every family, every quarrel, every whispered rumor. Parents bring their sons and daughters to him, hoping for guidance, or more bluntly, for connections. And while the church officially condemned clandestine unions, priests often bent the rules. Sometimes they blessed matches in secret, outside the official calendar, slipping couples a chance at love disguised as pastoral care. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, but traces appear in court records where bishops scolded priests for overstepping their bounds. It wasn't always romantic sympathy, of course. Sometimes priests acted as pragmatic dealmakers, arranging marriages to ease disputes over land or to settle debts. Their role wasn't Cupid with a halo. It was more like a medieval notary with an unusually intimate pen. But in rare cases, priests genuinely helped couples who longed to be together, offering quiet support in a world otherwise stacked against them. And confessions added fuel. Imagine a young woman whispering her affection for a man, a priest listening with pursed lips. He might scold, yes, but he also learned who loved whom. And sometimes, armed with that knowledge, he became an unlikely ally, finding ways to steer families toward agreement. Other times, of course, he betrayed those secrets, using them to enforce obedience. The line between matchmaker and jailer blurred with every whispered word. There were even stories of priests performing clandestine marriages, binding two people together in a chapel at night. Without witnesses, without family consent, these unions were legally dubious, often challenged, but they gave couples a fleeting taste of autonomy. Imagine the flicker of candlelight, the trembling hands, the whispered vows spoken with urgency. It was rebellion in holy robes. Of course, scandals erupted, priests accused of favoritism, of arranging matches for bribes, of bending rules too far. Some ended up in church courts themselves, their reputations stained for meddling too much in affairs of the heart. The paradox is hard to miss. The church condemned love outside sanctioned boundaries. Yet its own servants sometimes became the very bridges lovers crossed. Picture yourself in that courtyard, watching a priest whisper to a young couple beneath a tree. His eyes dart toward the church door, making sure no one sees. You don't hear the words, but you know what's being plotted, a future quietly rearranged, a chance at love smuggled through loopholes. The air feels thick with both risk and hope. And as you rest now, letting the story hum around you, you realize that even those sworn to suppress desire couldn't always resist meddling in it. In the Middle Ages, love twisted everyone's role, even turning holy men into accidental matchmakers. The murmurs of priests fade into the distance. And now you find yourself running, feet pounding down a dirt road, cloaks snapping in the wind. This is the world of runaway lovers, where hearts so desperate for freedom dared to abandon families, fortunes, and futures in search of something real. You can almost feel the night air against your skin, sharp with both fear and exhilaration, as though every breath might be your last taste of liberty. For many, escape was the only option. Arranged marriages loomed like prison doors. Dowries were signed away before a bride or groom had even reached adulthood. And parental authority felt immovable. So some couples fled. A peasant pair might vanish into the woods, hiding among travelers and pilgrims. Nobles sometimes tried the same, though their wealth and titles made anonymity nearly impossible. Imagine a lady of high birth trying to disguise herself in rough wool, romantic in theory, laughable in practice. Runaway stories survive in court records, often ending poorly. Families hunted down the fugitives. Lords dispatched guards, and sheriffs dragged the guilty back in chains. Punishments ranged from fines to forced marriages with other partners, designed to erase the scandal. Yet the very existence of these tales shows how fierce the desire for love was, so fierce that people risked starvation, prison, even death. Historians still argue whether runaways were driven mostly by passion, or by rebellion against unbearable circumstances. Likely, it was both. Picture a young man waiting outside a cottage at midnight, whispering to his beloved as she clutches a small bundle of belongings. They slip away through fields, each step crunching on frozen earth. Every sound makes them flinch, a dog barking, a crow stirring in the trees. Yet their hands stay clasped, their resolve unbroken. For them, danger is sweeter than obedience. But life on the run was brutal. Few had money, fewer had allies. Travelers were vulnerable to bandits, disease, and suspicion. Inns demanded coin. Strangers asked questions. And when exhaustion set in, lovers often faced the cruelest test of all, realizing that passion doesn't fill empty stomachs or protect against cold nights. Some stories of runaways end not in capture, but in quiet tragedies, lovers perishing together in forests or caves. Their bones discovered years later, locked in one final embrace. Yet others did succeed. Some made it to distant towns, claimed new identities, and built lives together beyond the reach of family control. Rare, yes, but possible. In those rare sparks, love won, brief victories against a system designed to snuff it out. You can almost smile at the thought, somewhere, two young rebels managed to slip through the cracks, proving that even in the harshest times, the heart could outwit the cage. And now, as you rest here, listening to the low hum of the present night, you can feel both the thrill and the sorrow of it. Runaway lovers lived on the edge of disaster. But for them, a single day of freedom together was worth more than a lifetime chained by duty. The chill night of escape fades. And now you hear the sound of heavy boots, angry shouts, and the clatter of iron chains. This is the grim aftermath, punished runaways. For every couple who slipped through the cracks, countless more were dragged back, paraded before family, community, and church as living lessons of what happens when love dares to defy the rules. Imagine the scene. A crowded market square. Villagers gathered with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Two young lovers, clothes torn from travel, faces pale with fear, stand before a magistrate. Their crime? Not theft, not murder, just choosing each other. And yet, the punishment could be brutal. For nobles, the stakes were higher still. A runaway daughter might be disinherited, locked in a convent, or forced into an even harsher marriage. A son might be sent to war, exiled, or stripped of inheritance. Families treated rebellion as betrayal. Communities joined in the spectacle. Public humiliation was a favorite tool. Lovers forced to wear ridiculous costumes, donkey ears, or placards declaring their sin. In some towns, couples were paraded through the streets on carts while villagers jeered. Picture the sting of laughter, the sting of shame, all because your heart had dared to wander outside the ledger of dowries and contracts. Historians still argue whether these punishments were more about morality or control, keeping everyone afraid enough not to try the same. And then there were the harsher ends. Some lovers faced imprisonment, their bond severed by stone walls. Others were separated permanently, one shipped to another village, the other chained to unwanted vows. In the most extreme cases, particularly where noble families feared scandal, punishment turned deadly. Quiet records hint at runaways who vanished from history altogether. Their names erased, their stories buried. Oddly enough, the Church sometimes offered both punishment and mercy. A priest might order long penance, fasting, or pilgrimages to atone for the rebellion. In rare cases, if families relented, the marriage might even be sanctioned after the fact, though only when it served political convenience. Imagine being whipped 1 week, then told the next that your union was blessed. Hypocrisy wrapped in holy robes. You can almost see their faces now, two young people, eyes swollen from tears, hands straining to reach each other before guards tear them apart. Their love is still there, pulsing, even as shame and fear close in. And you wonder, was the punishment worth it for them? Did those few stolen nights of freedom feel sweeter than the years of submission that followed? The nightmare is clear. In the Middle Ages, running toward love often meant running headlong into ruin. Yet people still tried, again and again, because the cage of duty was unbearable. And even failure tasted better than never daring at all. As you lie in the quiet hum of your own night, you can almost hear the echo of their chains, and beneath it, the stubborn beat of hearts that refused to be broken. The echoes of chains fade, and now you drift into the quieter, stranger misery of the Middle Ages, lovesick illness. In a world where romance was punished, forbidden, and smothered, people began to believe that longing itself could make you sick. You can almost picture a pale youth lying in a drafty chamber, staring at the ceiling beams, refusing food, sighing so heavily the whole household knows he has the malady of love. Medieval physicians actually wrote about it. They described symptoms with grave seriousness: loss of appetite, feverish sweats, wandering thoughts, even trembling fits. To us, it sounds like heartbreak or teenage angst. To them, it was a medical condition, as dangerous as a plague if left untreated. Some doctors claimed they could diagnose it just by feeling a patient's pulse when they heard the beloved's name. Imagine your doctor today checking your heart rate when you scroll through old texts. Awkward. But apparently cutting edge in the 13th century. Oddly, treatments were just as bizarre as the diagnosis. Physicians prescribed sleep, music, prayer, or even travel as cures. Others recommended more questionable remedies, strange herbs, potions, or purges to rebalance the humors. And yes, sometimes the cure was to arrange a marriage or, bluntly, to encourage intimacy with the beloved. Historians still debate how much of this was serious medicine and how much was superstition. But the belief was widespread enough to show up in court records, poems, and even sermons. Of course, not everyone saw it as a sickness. Troubadours and poets embraced lovesickness as proof of sincerity. A night pining away, refusing food, writing melancholy verses, it was practically fashionable. Suffering made love noble, or so the stories claimed. You weren't just in love, you were afflicted. Like a holy martyr wasting away for devotion. It's the kind of idea that makes you want to shake medieval society and say, maybe just let people date instead of dying over it. But the suffering was real. People truly fainted, starved, or wasted away, whether from actual illness or from the heavy burden of longing they could never fulfill. In villages, whispers of young men and women, dying of love, drifted through the streets. A reminder of how dangerous emotions were in a world that left no space for them. Picture yourself lying in that wooden bed, straw mattress prickling your skin, as someone brings you broth you refuse to eat. Your family mutters about demons or curses. But you know the truth. Your heart aches for someone you cannot have. Each night, you grow weaker, as if the absence itself is draining life from your bones. Outside, the world goes on, fields plowed, bells rung, but inside, you are unraveling. And yet, the irony. Sometimes the cure wasn't medicine at all. A single meeting, a single smile, could revive the patient. Lovers hidden from each other suddenly reunited. And the sick miraculously healed. No herb, no chant, no prayer could match the power of simple human connection. As you rest now, listening to the hum of the present night, you sense the haunting fragility of it. To be alive in that world was to risk sickness not just of body, but of heart. Love wasn't just a danger, it was believed to be a disease. And yet, people still longed, still ached, still wasted away for the one thing their society refused to grant freely. The image of pale lovers fading in straw beds dissolves. And now you step into the harsher daylight of reality, women's limited choices. In the medieval nightmare of love, no cage was tighter than the one built around women's lives. You can almost hear the creak of heavy doors. Not from dungeons, but from expectations. Every path mapped out long before a girl could dream her own. From birth, a daughter's future was rarely hers to choose. Her family decided whether she would marry, enter a convent, or sometimes serve in another household. Love, if she felt it, was rarely part of the calculation. A girl might glance at a boy from her village, share a laugh, even hope, but her parents already had other plans sealed with a handshake or a scroll. Imagine being told your heart is irrelevant, that your dowry speaks louder than your voice. Marriage itself was duty more than desire. Women were expected to obey, to bear children, to secure alliances. Refusing a match was nearly unthinkable. Obedience was survival. Even noble women, cloaked in silk, lived under this iron law. And peasants fared little better, their choices determined by fields, tools, and livestock. You sense it now. Affection was a luxury, while obligation was a sentence. The paradox grows sharper when you look at how women were judged. A man could wander, pursue affairs, or boast of conquests with far fewer consequences. But a woman's reputation was brittle glass, one crack, and it shattered beyond repair. Even suspicion could ruin her. Villagers whispered, nobles gossiped, and the church thundered, all ready to pin shame on her shoulders. Historians still argue whether this was truly about morality or simply control. Likely, it was both, and yet, women found ways to resist. Some wielded wit, using the ideal of chastity as leverage to negotiate better matches or delay unwanted ones. Others slipped into secret affairs, trusting only in shadows. A few even disguised themselves as men to escape marriages entirely. These stories flicker through records like sparks in the dark, reminders that even under crushing weight, human will found cracks. But for most, the cage held firm. Picture a young woman sitting by a hearth, needle in hand, sewing garments while her parents discuss her future in the next room. She knows she will have no say. Her dreams of love, those whispered fantasies, must be folded away like the cloth on her lap. She feels it, you feel it. The quiet ache of lives determined by others. And yet, her longing still mattered. It shows up in songs, in poems, in letters, sometimes scrawled anonymously, sometimes hidden in stories told to children. Her voice may not have carried weight in law or church, but it seeped through in culture. Subtle but enduring, love, even when denied, left echoes. As you lie in the hum of this moment, you realize how cruelly lopsided the game was. For women, love wasn't just forbidden, it was nearly impossible. Yet impossibility never stopped them from wanting, dreaming, and sometimes daring. That defiance, however small, was its own kind of victory. The quiet ache of women's lost choices lingers. And now you're pulled into the other side of the nightmare, men's double standards. In the Middle Ages, society carved one set of rules for women, another for men. And the imbalance is so glaring you almost want to laugh, except it isn't funny at all. Imagine a nobleman strutting through a castle hall. He might keep a wife for duty, but no one blinks if he has a mistress tucked away, or even several. He might boast of escapades with serving girls, and the courtiers around him nod knowingly, maybe even envy him. If a woman dared the same, she'd face exile, punishment, or worse. Love was risky for both sexes. Yes, but the scales tilted heavily in men's favor. Even the church, so strict on paper, often looked the other way for men. A confession of sins of the flesh from a husband might earn him a few prayers and a stern lecture. Nothing more. A wife, meanwhile, confessing the same risked losing her marriage, her children, and her place in society. Historians still argue whether this was hypocrisy or practicality. After all, men held the power, and the rules were written to protect them. And it wasn't just nobles. Among peasants, too, men were granted more leeway. A farmer's affair might be excused as natural, while his wife would be mocked or punished for even appearing flirtatious. Gossip carried sharper edges when it sliced at women. Men's reputations could be patched, women's reputations shattered like glass. Oddly enough, this double standard even crept into the laws of love, celebrated in poetry. Troubadours sang of men's endless suffering for ladies, painting their desire as noble, heroic, but women who expressed longing too openly, they were branded shameless. It was as though men's emotions were art, while women's were sins. You can almost hear the unfairness crackle like static in the torchlit halls. Picture yourself walking through a medieval village. You see a man laughing with friends, boasting about a flirtation. Everyone chuckles. Then you see a woman glance twice at someone not her husband. And suddenly tongues wag, whispers sharpen, reputations tremble. The air feels heavy with injustice. And yet, some women found ways to turn this double standard back. A clever noblewoman might deflect suspicion by feigning piety, or by weaving her feelings into poetry under a man's name. Some serving girls simply shrugged off the judgment, trusting that time and work would dull the gossip. Resistance was quiet, but it existed. Still, the nightmare endured. Men had room to stumble. Women did not. Love was a battlefield, but the terrain tilted, always slanting against her. As you rest now, listening to the soft hum of the present, you can sense the weight of it, the unfairness heavy, suffocating, and yet, beneath it, the same truth beats on. Hearts ignored the rules. No matter how unevenly they were drawn, the unfair weight of double standards lingers. But now you drift into a quieter, more secretive corner of the medieval nightmare, where love hides in symbols. When words were too dangerous and reputations too fragile, affection slipped into tokens. A ribbon tied to a sleeve, a flower pressed into a palm, a ring etched with a hidden mark. You can almost feel the thrill of secrecy as you imagine slipping a folded handkerchief into someone's pocket, knowing it speaks louder than any whispered confession. These symbols became a language all their own. A red rose tucked into a braid might mean passion. A sprig of rosemary promised remembrance. A lady might drop a glove by accident, letting her chosen knight scoop it up as though fate itself had arranged the moment. And knights carried these tokens into battle. Scarves or veils tied to lances. Shields painted with colors that quietly declared devotion. To the outside world, it looked like pageantry. To the lovers, it was a love letter fluttering in plain sight. Historians still debate how widely understood these codes were. Did everyone recognize them, or were they secrets only two people could read? Some argue that entire courts played along, delighting in the spectacle while pretending ignorance. Others believe the symbols were truly clandestine, small rebellions invisible to most. Either way, the idea that love could be smuggled through fabric, flowers, and jewelry reveals just how desperately people yearned to communicate. And it wasn't just nobles. In villages, too, tokens appeared. A carved wooden spoon offered at a festival might mean affection. A woven belt given at midsummer could signal intention. Even the simplest objects, bread shared, or a ribbon dyed with homemade dye, became laden with meaning. Picture a farm boy awkwardly handing a girl a bundle of herbs. his cheeks red, both knowing the gesture carried more weight than 100 words. Of course, the risk was always there. If the wrong person spotted the token, it could spark rumors, jealousy, even punishment. A scarf tied to the wrong arm might ignite scandal. And sometimes symbols backfired. Histories tell of knights carrying a token into battle only to have it discovered, exposing an affair that had been carefully hidden. A single glove could unravel reputations. Yet the practice persisted because it gave people agency. In a world where marriages were arranged, where choices were stolen, a ribbon or a flower allowed individuals to claim at least a sliver of their own story. Imagine the courage it took to tie a knot in your sleeve, knowing the person you longed for would notice, while everyone else saw nothing. You can almost feel it now, the heartbeat quickening as a token is passed. The relief of being seen, the quiet fire of being understood. No matter how cruel the laws, love still found its voice, even if it spoke only in symbols. And as you sink deeper into the hum of the night, you realize that in those small gestures lay the truest rebellion. Against politics, against the church, against double standards. A single flower could carry more power than all the contracts and sermons combined. The handkerchief drops from memory, and now you hear the faint pluck of strings, the rise of voices carried on the wind. This is the world of songs of desire, where love, too dangerous to speak openly, was sung instead. In the Middle Ages, music became both shield and weapon, a way to cloak passion in melody while slipping it past watchful eyes. You can almost hear it now, a lone troubadour beneath a castle window, strumming gently, his verses half prayer, half confession. These songs weren't subtle in emotion. They poured out longing, devotion, and frustration, dressed in metaphors of nature and battle. A nightingale's call might stand for a lover's voice, a stormy sea for unfulfilled passion. The lyrics gave the heart permission to speak in riddles, so that anyone listening could hear a pleasant tune. But the intended soul would know the truth. It's like sending a love text hidden inside a public poem, hoping only one person notices. The power of these songs was immense. They spread beyond courtly halls into villages, carried by wandering minstrels who wove desire into dance tunes. Imagine a crowded feast, mugs clinking, people laughing, and then a singer's voice cuts through, spinning a tale of a love forbidden yet unstoppable. Suddenly, everyone listens, because everyone, no matter how bound by rules, understands the ache. Historians still debate whether these songs were tolerated because they seemed harmless, or because even bishops and kings couldn't resist their pull. But danger always lingered. A troubadour who sang too pointedly could be accused of stirring scandal. Some were banished for their boldness, others imprisoned for daring to name noble ladies in their verses. Still, many pressed on, because what was art if not rebellion in rhyme? And you can almost smile, thinking how much courage it took to strum a lute knowing your lyrics might earn you chains. Even peasants wove songs of desire into their lives. At harvest festivals, couples sang call and response ballads where every playful line hinted at more. A girl might sing of a bird trapped in a cage, and the boy's reply about freeing the bird wasn't lost on anyone. Music became the one safe space where affection could be hinted at without outright confession. Oddly enough, not all songs were mournful. Some were playful, teasing, even a little cheeky. Desire could be painted as laughter as well as longing. Proof that the human heart found ways to joke even under chains. But beneath the humor laid truth. The yearning was real, constant, and impossible to silence. Picture yourself now beneath a starlit sky, listening to a voice carry across the courtyard. You don't need to know the language to feel it, the tug in the chest, the warmth in the throat, the ache of wanting. In that moment, the whole world seems to hush, caught in the spell of song. And as you lie here, listening to the soft hum of your own night, you realize music was the one place love could breathe openly, even if only for a fleeting verse. Songs of desire carried what letters risked, what tokens whispered, proof that the heart, no matter how forbidden, always found a way to sing. The notes of the troubadour drift away, and now you see the glitter of jewels and the shimmer of silk. But don't be fooled, behind the finery lies some of the bleakest cages of all. This is the story of noble women's sad fate, where marriages were gilded prisons and love was often nothing more than a ghost at the banquet. Imagine a young noblewoman, raised in a castle, taught to embroider, to sing politely, to walk with grace. From childhood, she knows her destiny is sealed. Her hand will be traded like currency. Her worth measured in dowry and alliance. Love, if she dares to dream of it, has no place in the ledger. Picture her gazing out of a tower window, heart aching for freedom, while her parents sign her life away in the hall below. The marriages themselves were often cold, strategic unions between strangers or near strangers. A noble woman might be sent hundreds of miles away, never to see her family again, all for the sake of tying lands together. Once married, she was expected to produce heirs, sons, ideally, and to manage her husband's household with flawless obedience. Love wasn't just optional, it was irrelevant. Historians still debate whether some women found small joys in friendship with their husbands. But most accounts suggest loneliness cloaked in velvet. And if a noble woman dared to seek affection elsewhere, the risks were catastrophic. Queens accused of affairs could lose crowns, even lives. Countesses could be locked in towers, their reputations destroyed forever. Men strayed with more leniency. But for her, one whisper of romance outside her marriage could erase everything. It's like playing a game where the rules are rigged, and only you get disqualified. Even within the castle walls, freedom was scarce. Women were monitored by ladies-in-waiting, guards, and priests. Their letters were intercepted, their movements watched. Yet, in secret, some still tried. A ribbon tied, a poem whispered, a glance stolen in chapel. These sparks of rebellion shine faintly in chronicles. Proof that even the most controlled hearts still long to be seen. The irony is sharp. Noble women, draped in the richest fabrics, often lived poorer in freedom than peasant girls. At least a farmer's daughter might know the man she married, might share in work and laughter. A countess might dine on gold plates but sit across from a husband twice her age, more concerned with land disputes than her smile. And yet, they endured. Some wielded their positions cleverly, using influence in court, or raising children who might one day change their fortunes. Others poured their longing into patronage of art and poetry, surrounding themselves with songs of love they could never live. A few rare voices, preserved in letters, reveal bitterness so sharp you can feel it centuries later. Picture her now, seated at a banquet table, surrounded by laughter and music. Pearls gleam on her neck. A jeweled cup rests in her hand. Outwardly, she is the image of privilege. But her eyes drift toward the window, toward a world she'll never touch. Her fate is sealed, her heart silenced, her longing hidden beneath silks no one can see through. As you rest in the soft hum of the present night, you can feel the quiet tragedy of it. In the Middle Ages, noble women lived in castles that were cages, gilded but still locked. Love was their phantom companion, always near, always untouchable. The jeweled sadness of noble women lingers. But now the story tilts back toward the thrones themselves, kings and their mistresses. If noble women often found themselves trapped, kings rarely accepted such cages. Instead, they built gilded side doors, filling their courts with lovers who shaped politics as much as passion. You can almost hear the hushed gossip in the corridors, the rustle of silk skirts in hidden chambers, the clink of goblets raised in scandal's shadow. For kings, mistresses were both indulgence and strategy. Some were chosen for beauty, others for wit, and some simply for the thrill of defiance. The official queen might sit at the head of the table, but it was often the mistress whispering in the king's ear who swayed the feast's true outcome. Imagine laws and wars being decided not in solemn councils, but in the quiet intimacy of a bedchamber. Historians still argue, were these women powerless pawns of desire, or subtle power brokers wielding influence through charm? Perhaps, like love itself, the answer was complicated. Courts revolved around these affairs. Some mistresses were adored, showered with jewels and estates, elevated until they rivaled queens. Others were despised, blamed for every famine, every tax, every unpopular war. Songs were written about them, some adoring, others mocking. It's not hard to picture crowds outside the palace, chanting a mistress's name, either in fury or fascination. And the hypocrisy ran deep. A king could flaunt his lovers, sometimes keeping whole households of them, while a queen risked death for even the hint of adultery. The double standard was a crown's privilege, his passion excused as vigor, hers condemned as treason. You can almost hear the bitter laughter of queens forced to smile while their husbands paraded mistresses openly. Yet some mistresses genuinely held affection for their kings. Letters revealed tenderness, playful banter, even jokes that humanize these grand figures. Behind the spectacle, there were real feelings, hearts beating nervously. Lovers who risked everything for a few stolen moments. At times, the passion was genuine, at others, it was survival disguised as love. Picture yourself in a glittering court chamber. Tapestries shimmer, candles flicker, courtiers murmur. The king enters with his queen on one arm, his mistress hovering nearby. Everyone sees, everyone knows. Yet no one dares to speak it aloud. The air feels heavy with pretense, as though the very stones are holding their tongues. The nightmare of medieval love sharpens here. What was scandal for commoners became spectacle for royals. And still, beneath the politics, the jewels, the hypocrisy, the same hunger burned, the human need to be desired, to be chosen, even if only in secret. As you settle deeper into the hum of the present night, you realize that kings and mistresses were not so different from peasants sneaking notes or lovers fleeing villages. The stage was grander, yes, the stakes higher. But the story was the same. Love, forbidden or flaunted, always found a way. The glittering halls of kings fade. And now you walk a dirt path lined with cottages. Smoke rises from low chimneys. Children chase chickens through the mud. And the air smells of earth and wood smoke. Here, among the common folk, you find something rare in the medieval nightmare, commoner's devotion. It wasn't free of hardship, but stripped of gold and politics. Love among the poor sometimes shone with a sincerity the nobles could only dream of. Picture a farmer and his wife working side by side in the fields. Hands blistered, backs aching, yet stealing smiles between furrows. Their marriage may still have been arranged, but it was rooted in survival, shared labor, and mutual need. Over time, affection often grew naturally. Unlike nobles, peasants couldn't afford endless scandals or runaway affairs. Plowing, planting, and raising children together demanded a partnership that bred closeness. That's not to say it was idyllic. Poverty pressed hard, and many couples were matched by families eager to merge land or tools. Yet here, love sometimes crept in through routine. A man bringing home extra firewood. A woman mending clothes with care. Small acts that whispered devotion louder than any troubadour's song. Historians still argue whether peasants were freer in love than nobles. But glimpses in records suggest they often carved out more space for genuine bonds. Festivals became their stage. Imagine a midsummer night, fires burning high, music filling the air, young men and women danced in circles, laughter bubbling under the stars. It was one of the few times the rigid rules loosened, and couples could meet with something close to freedom. Songs were sung, riddles exchanged, tokens offered. Behind the gaiety, hearts connected, not through contracts, but through glances and laughter. Of course, dangers still lurked. Gossip in a small village could still ruin a woman's name. Jealousy could still erupt into brawls. And the church's sermons rang just as harsh in cottages as in cathedrals. But unlike nobles, commoners had fewer political eyes watching, fewer treaties weighing down their choices. In that small gap of freedom, devotion sometimes blossomed. Oddly enough, some of the most touching love stories in medieval records come not from kings or knights, but from peasants. Court cases mention couples defending their unions fiercely, refusing to part even under pressure. Ballads tell of farm boys and milkmaids whose devotion outlasted hardship. In these quiet corners, love endured because it had to. It was warmth against cold winters, laughter against hunger, hope against despair. Picture yourself in one of those cottages now. The walls are rough timber. The fire crackles low. A couple sits together, children asleep nearby. Their clothes are patched, their feet bare, but they lean into each other, weary yet content. It's not a fairy tale, not a gilded romance, but it is love, plain and stubborn, carved into the rhythm of survival. As you rest in the hum of your own night, you sense how precious that devotion was. For all the nightmares of the Middle Ages, love among commoners sometimes slipped through unbroken. Small, steady, imperfect, but real. The humble warmth of peasant devotion flickers out. And now you step into the solemn hush of stone cloisters. Monasteries, supposed to be fortresses of purity, prayer, and silence, were not immune to the oldest stirrings of the heart. This is the world of scandals in monasteries. where vows clashed with desire. And even holy walls couldn't keep love from breaking in. Imagine long corridors echoing with chants. Candlelight flickering against carved arches. The air thick with incense. Monks and nuns lived under vows of chastity. Yet they were still human. Hearts still beat. Eyes still strayed. Whispers still found their way through cloistered walls. Records tell of secret meetings in gardens. Letters exchanged under the guise of prayer notes. Even whole convents accused of harboring forbidden romances. Some scandals were whispered. Some exploded into full trials. Bishops investigated. Punishments fell. Reputations crumbled. A monk caught in an affair might be transferred. Locked in stricter confinement. Or cast out. A nun might be expelled. Shamed publicly. Her family disgraced. Yet for all the fear, the stories kept surfacing. Proof that the human longing for connection couldn't be fully smothered by vows. Oddly enough, some monasteries became notorious for repeated scandals. In one French abbey, rumors swirled of secret tunnels connecting nuns' quarters to nearby villages. In another, chronicles accuse entire groups of monks of entertaining women behind cloister walls. Historians still debate how exaggerated these tales were. Were they moral panics spread by rivals? Are genuine accounts of passion erupting in unlikely places? Perhaps both. And the hypocrisy was staggering. While clergy thundered against the sins of ordinary people, some abbots and abbesses quietly indulged. A few even built private chambers for favored companions, decorating them with luxuries at odds with their vows. Imagine walking past rows of bare cells only to stumble upon a hidden chamber lined with silk cushions. Laughter muffled behind heavy doors. Yet, woven into these scandals were real feelings. Letters from monks to women outside revealed tender affection. Even desperation. One confessed he thought more of his beloved than of God, begging forgiveness while admitting he couldn't stop. You can almost feel the torment, caught between sacred duty and human longing. Punished no matter which way he turned. Picture yourself wandering those cloisters at night. The stone is cold beneath your feet. The moonlight slicing through narrow windows. You hear a soft knock. The shuffle of robes. Two figures slipping into shadow. For them, that moment is everything. Rebellion. Risk. And the fragile sweetness of being seen. For you, centuries later, it's a reminder that love doesn't respect walls. No matter how high they're built. As you sink deeper into the hum of the night, the irony hums, too. Monasteries meant to silence desire sometimes became its stage. Love was supposed to die at the altar of vows. Yet it persisted, stubborn, scandalous, and utterly human. The stone cloisters dissolve, and now you hear the scratch of quills. The murmur of recited verse. The sighs of poets who turned their pain into ink. This is the poetry of suffering, where medieval love, denied, forbidden, and punished, became art. You can almost feel the weight of parchment beneath your fingers. See the blot of ink spreading like a tear. Troubadours, court poets, and wandering singers all drew from the same well, the ache of desire. To them, suffering wasn't just part of love, it was love. The more unreachable the beloved, the nobler the devotion. Imagine writing verse after verse not about joy, but about the exquisite agony of wanting what you cannot have. It's like treating heartbreak as a badge of honor. A wound polished until it gleams. Their poems overflowed with metaphors. A knight's longing became a falcon straining against its leash. A lady's indifference was winter frost on tender fields. A single smile could be likened to sunlight breaking after months of rain. Yet beneath the beauty was always the same refrain: love hurts. And that hurt proves its depth. Historians still debate whether these poems reflected real relationships or were carefully crafted performances, but either way, they reveal a culture addicted to suffering as proof of sincerity. Even women, when given rare chances to write, wove their pain into verse. Some anonymous lyrics hint at voices pressed down by silence, finding release in rhythm and rhyme. A noble woman might never be allowed to choose her husband, but she could slip her heart into a song that circled the halls. Her pain disguised as art. You can almost hear the trembling behind the melody. A cry that no priest could silence once it was sung. And then there was humor, yes. Even in suffering, some poems mocked jealousy, turning pain into satire. Others teased about lovesickness, poking fun at men too moody to eat because their lady hadn't looked their way. These playful verses remind you that even in a culture that glorified sorrow, people still laughed at themselves. A knight fainting over a forgotten ribbon might have seemed noble to some, but to others, it was comedy gold. Picture yourself in a candlelit hall. A troubadour strumming his lute, reciting lines that drip with longing. The crowd listens, sighs, nods. You watch as a lady dabs her eyes with a kerchief, while across the room a man pretends not to notice, though he knows the verses are for him. For the audience, it's entertainment. For the poet, it's survival. And as you lie now in the hum of the present night, you realize how universal that impulse is. To take pain and spin it into beauty. To write, to sing, to whisper so that the heart's ache becomes bearable. In the Middle Ages, love may have been a nightmare, but through poetry, suffering became immortal, echoing in words that still stir us centuries later. The candlelit verses fade, and now you're running again, hearts pounding, cloaks flying in the wind. But this time, the story doesn't end in ballads of triumph. This is the folly of elopements, where lovers who dared to flee the cages of duty often found only tragedy waiting down the road. You can almost feel the mud sucking at your boots as you sprint into the night. The thrill of freedom crashing against the dread of being caught. Elopements were the medieval gamble. Two hearts against the entire weight of family, law, and church. For a brief, shining moment, it felt intoxicating. Imagine a young couple riding horseback beneath a pale moon, their laughter sharp with fear. For them, love meant risk, and escape was the only way to seize it. But most tales end not with joy, but with ruin. Families rarely forgave such defiance. Fathers dispatched armed men to retrieve wayward daughters. Brothers hunted suitors through forests. Mothers wept not for lost affection but for ruined alliances. Some couples were dragged back in chains, their unions annulled, their reputations shredded. Others, once caught, were forced into even harsher marriages as punishment, bound forever to prove that rebellion brings only suffering. Historians still argue whether these tales were exaggerated moral lessons or real events recorded in bitter detail. Likely, both. And for those who escaped capture, survival was grim. Without land, dowry, or inheritance, many eloping couples faced hunger and hardship. A peasant might lose the support of his village, A noblewoman might lose everything: title, wealth, protection. Love may have lit the fire. But fire doesn't feed empty stomachs. Picture a couple huddled in a damp barn, cold wind seeping through the cracks, realizing that passion is no match for poverty. Yet some persisted. A handful of elopements blossomed into legends, retold in folk songs and whispered in villages. These rare couples became proof that sometimes love could defy the odds. But for every happy ending, dozens more fell into sorrow, lives cut short, bonds broken by force, or lovers separated forever. The balance weighed heavily on tragedy. Oddly, poets adored these stories. Elopements made perfect cautionary tales, ripe with drama and heartbreak. Plays and ballads warned audiences of the dangers, portraying runaways as foolish, reckless, doomed. And yet, behind the warnings, you sense admiration too. After all, it takes courage to defy the world for the sake of love, even if that courage so often ended in loss. Picture yourself standing on a hill at dawn, watching a pair of figures ride into the distance, their silhouettes sharp against the pale light. For a moment, they look free, but you know what history has shown. The world rarely forgave such boldness. And in that realization lies the bitter truth: medieval elopements were not fairy tales, but fragile sparks too often snuffed out by reality. As you rest in the hum of your own night, you feel the ache of those failed escapes. Love in the Middle Ages wasn't just forbidden, it was hunted. And even when two people dared to chase it into the wild, the world almost always caught them. The image of desperate riders dissolves. And now you're pulled into the solemn halls of canon law, where ink on parchment tried to control what hearts had always claimed. This is the law of consent, an idea that flickered faintly in the Middle Ages, whispering that marriage wasn't just a contract between families, but required the free agreement of bride and groom. In theory, it was revolutionary. In practice, it was a battlefield. The Church declared that a marriage was valid if two people freely consented, spoken vows, exchanged in the present tense, were binding even without parental approval. Imagine how shocking that must have sounded in a world where families traded daughters like cattle and alliances mattered more than smiles. Suddenly, two young lovers could, at least in theory, stand in a field, vow themselves to each other, and be considered husband and wife in God's eyes. But reality quickly tangled the promise. Parents and lords resisted fiercely. They could not afford to let sons and daughters throw away fortunes on whim. Many families simply refused to recognize secret unions, dragging couples before courts to annul the vows. Some judges sided with the lovers, others with the families. Historians still argue how often the Church truly defended consent, or whether the principle was more convenient on parchment than in life. And yet, the seed had been planted. Secret marriages sprouted everywhere. Lovers whispered vows at wells, in barns, under trees, anywhere they could steal a moment of privacy. These unions were risky. If discovered, couples could be punished, shamed, or forced apart. But in the rare cases where the Church upheld them, they became a lifeline of hope. Imagine the courage it took, standing hand in hand, speaking vows that defied both family and law, trusting only in God as witness. No banquet, no witnesses, no feast, just trembling voices in the dark. And then the long wait. hoping the Church's promise of consent would protect them when the inevitable storm arrived. Of course, hypocrisy crept in. Consent mattered, but only when convenient. Noble unions arranged by kings were rarely questioned, no matter how reluctant the bride. Meanwhile, peasants' secret vows were often ridiculed as folly. Still, the idea was out there, that a marriage required two willing hearts. Even if the world crushed most who tried to claim it, the principle itself refused to vanish. Picture yourself listening to a young couple beneath a tree at dusk. Their words are quiet but certain. I take you as mine. I take you as mine. For them, it is enough. For society, it is a threat. And for us, centuries later, it is a fragile spark of justice flickering in a world built on duty. As you lie in the hum of the present night, you realize how radical that spark was. In a landscape where love was nightmare, the law of consent was a whisper of possibility, small, often silenced, but never fully extinguished. The whisper of vows beneath a tree lingers. And now you step into the murky shadows where that fragile law of consent took on its most dangerous form, clandestine marriages. These unions were quick, secret, and often reckless, forged in passion but haunted by risk. You can almost feel the tension of a midnight chapel. Two figures clutching each other's hands as a trembling priest mutters words he knows could cost him dearly. In theory, the Church insisted that free consent made a marriage valid. In practice, that meant couples could marry without family approval, no feast, no dowry, no witnesses, just words spoken in the present tense. Imagine the thrill. You and the one you love stepping into a barn, exchanging vows under torchlight, and walking away bound together in God's eyes. No contracts, no negotiations, just choice. But secrecy came with chaos. Families raged when they discovered their carefully arranged alliances overturned. Lawsuits piled up as fathers demanded annulments, claiming their children had been coerced or tricked. Sometimes the Church sided with the lovers, sometimes with the families. Historians still argue whether clandestine marriages were liberating acts of defiance or foolish gambles that left couples vulnerable. Likely, they were both, and the risks didn't stop with angry parents. Without witnesses, it was easy for one partner to deny the union later, leaving the other trapped in limbo. Courts wrestled with, he said, she said, disputes that shattered reputations and futures. Imagine confessing your vows in secret, only to be told later that they never happened. The heartbreak must have cut deeper than any sword. Yet couples kept trying. Why? Because even a fragile chance at love was worth it. A noble woman, desperate to escape an arranged match, might run to a sympathetic priest. A peasant, unable to afford dowry negotiations, might choose love over livestock. In every corner of society, clandestine vows shimmered like fragile sparks against the dark weight of tradition. Picture yourself in that flickering chapel, the air damp with candle smoke. Two voices tremble as they speak the sacred words. The priest nods quickly, makes the sign of the cross, then hurries them out before anyone notices. Outside, the night feels alive, filled with the thrill of rebellion. But in the distance, you already sense the storm of discovery waiting. And here's the cruel irony. Clandestine marriages were both weapon and trap. They offered love a fleeting chance, but they also gave enemies a tool to ruin lives. A whispered vow could be salvation or destruction, depending on who heard it, who believed it, and who stood to gain from denying it. As you rest in the hum of your own night, you feel the fragility of it all. Love in the Middle Ages clung to shadows, whispered in barns, sealed in chapels after dark. Clandestine marriages weren't fairy tales. They were desperate gambles in a world that punished desire at every turn. The hurried vows in shadow fade, and now you find yourself in a heavy chamber of stone, where candles flicker over parchment scrolls. This is where clandestine passion often met its end, church annulments. You can almost hear the scrape of a quill, the drone of clerics reading testimony, the sigh of lovers forced to stand as their union is dissected like a crime. Annulments weren't divorces, not in the medieval world, where marriage was meant to be indissoluble. Instead, they declared a union invalid, as if it had never existed. Families eager to erase inconvenient matches dragged couples before bishops, armed with claims of coercion, deceit, or improper consent. It was the cold machinery of power grinding love into dust. Imagine a young woman trembling as her father insists she was tricked into a midnight wedding. Imagine her husband pleading, insisting their vows were free and true. The clerics nod gravely, write notes, debate Latin phrases. In the end, the verdict doesn't rest on love, it rests on politics. Historians still argue whether annulments were tools of justice or simply weapons for the powerful. Too often, they seem to have been both. The reasons cited could be absurdly technical. Maybe one partner was underage by a single year. Maybe they were distant cousins. And someone suddenly remembered the family tie. Maybe the words spoken during the vows weren't phrased exactly right. Picture two people giving their hearts, only to have a bishop declare, centuries of theology in hand, that the words didn't count. Bureaucracy as heartbreak. And then there was bribery. Wealthy families slipped gold into clerical hands to ensure annulments went their way. The church thundered against corruption, but quietly pocketed the coins. The result was predictable. Peasants often lost. Nobles often won. Even here, love bent beneath the weight of class. Yet sometimes, lovers fought back and won. Records show couples defending their unions fiercely, producing witnesses, swearing oaths, even dragging their families into scandal rather than yield. For them, the cost was worth it, because erasure felt worse than shame. A clandestine marriage was fragile. Yes, but it was still theirs. Picture yourself in that chamber now. The air thick with incense and tension. A scribe's quill scratches. A bishop clears his throat. And two lovers stand hand in hand, knowing their fate rests not on devotion but on interpretation. Their vows, spoken in trembling whispers, now weighed against canon law. You can almost feel their despair. How do you defend love when love itself is on trial? And as you rest in the hum of your own night, you realize how cruel annulments truly were. They didn't just break bonds, they pretended bonds never existed. In the nightmare of medieval love, even memory could be stripped away, leaving only silence where hearts once beat together. The quiet scratching of quills fades. And now the air grows heavier, colder. This is where the nightmare sharpens to its cruelest edge. Execution for adultery. In the Middle Ages, love gone astray could mean not just gossip or shame, but death itself. You can almost hear the crowd gathering, the rustle of cloaks, the clank of chains as those accused are dragged into the square. Adultery wasn't simply a personal failing, it was treated as a crime against family, honor, and even God. For noble women, the stakes were highest. A queen or countess accused of infidelity risked her crown, her children, her life. Kings strayed openly, flaunting mistresses in gilded chambers. But a single whisper against a queen could summon the axe. Historians still debate how many of these charges were genuine and how many were political tools, convenient excuses to remove unwanted wives. Either way, the terror was real. For common women, punishments varied. Some towns resorted to flogging, branding, or public humiliation. Others went further, stoning, burning, or hanging. Men accused of adultery were sometimes punished, too, but the weight fell unevenly. Society treated women as vessels of lineage. Their betrayal was seen as more dangerous, more unforgivable. The double standard sharpened into blood. Picture a marketplace, buzzing with ordinary trade, suddenly transformed into a stage of cruelty. A woman tied to a post, her hair loose and wild, accused of nothing more than loving the wrong man. The crowd jeers, priests chant, and the sentence is carried out before eyes too numb to protest. It's a scene meant not just to punish, but to warn. Love, in this world, could kill you. And yet, even in the shadow of death, stories of defiance survive. Some lovers clung to each other to the last, refusing to recant. Others faced their fate with silence, eyes lifted to the sky, as if love itself gave them a final dignity. The chronicles record their names sparingly, but the echoes remain, proof that even the harshest punishments couldn't fully erase what hearts dared to feel. Oddly enough, art and literature fed the paradox. Ballads sang of tragic adulteresses, turning their deaths into spectacle. Plays mocked cuckolded husbands while quietly sympathizing with wives trapped in loveless marriages. The line between cautionary tale and secret admiration blurred, as though society condemned in daylight what it secretly longed for in the dark. Picture yourself now in that square, the winter wind biting at your face. You hear the verdict, watch the punishment, feel the horror sink in. The message is unmistakable. In the Middle Ages, love could be fatal. A choice of the heart wasn't just a gamble of reputation, it was sometimes a gamble of life itself. As you rest again in the hum of the present night, you sense the cruelty in sharp relief. Here, the nightmare of love reached its darkest depth. To be accused was to be erased, body and soul, by a society that feared the heart more than any weapon. The crackle of execution fire fades, and now you step into the echoing halls of the church, where bells toll and sermons thunder. Here, every story you've followed converges under one heavy banner: love as sin. In the medieval nightmare, desire itself was framed as corruption, a stain on the soul that no feast, no vow, no secret glance could ever fully wash away. You can almost hear the echo of a preacher's voice, rising over a hushed congregation. Even your thoughts betray you. From pulpit to parchment, the church warned against passion. Love outside marriage was condemned outright. Even within marriage, desire was treated with suspicion, to be tolerated only for procreation. Pleasure itself was dangerous, tangled with guilt, Picture a couple kneeling in prayer after their wedding night, asking forgiveness not for cruelty, not for lies, but simply for enjoying each other too much. Absurd? Yes. But that was the climate in which people lived. Theologians wrote endlessly about the hierarchy of sins. Lust, they argued, distracted souls from God. Love songs were frivolous temptations. Longing glances were gateways to damnation. Even dreams were suspect. Historians still debate how sincerely ordinary people absorbed this constant warning, but the shadow of guilt stretches through countless records. Proof that the message sank deep. And yet, paradox thrived. Priests and monks who thundered against sin often slipped into it themselves. Courts filled with cases of clergy accused of affairs. Some fathering children, others secretly marrying. The louder the sermons, the more glaring the hypocrisy. You can almost imagine villagers smirking in silence, knowing that the men condemning their desires were wrestling with the same urges behind closed doors. But for the faithful, the guilt was crushing. Picture yourself as a peasant kneeling in confession, whispering to a priest that you'd thought of a neighbor too fondly, or kissed someone behind a barn. You're told to fast, to pray, to purge yourself of passion. You leave lighter in spirit perhaps, but also weighed down by shame that your very heart betrays God. Love, in this world, wasn't celebrated, it was feared. Families treated it as dangerous rebellion, the church as moral collapse, communities as scandal waiting to ignite. And so, even when tenderness bloomed, it was coated in suspicion, hemmed in by sermons, dragged back under the iron rule that love was sin. Picture a medieval cathedral now, vast stone arches, candles flickering in stained glass light. The beauty is breathtaking, but the message beneath it chills you. Deny yourself, or be damned. And somewhere in the pews sits a young man, his heart hammering for someone across the aisle. He knows the preacher's words condemn him, yet he cannot silence the beat in his chest. As you sink into the soft hum of your own night, you feel the irony cut deep. In a world desperate for salvation, love itself was painted as the devil's trick, the greatest human bond turned into humanity's gravest fault. And still, hearts yearned, because no sermon, no bell, no threat of hell could fully erase the ache of wanting. The tolling bells fade, and the world settles into a heavy twilight. You've walked through villages and castles, chapels and courts, watched whispers become scandals, and seen longing punished as crime. Now you stand at the edge of it all, the nightmare of desire itself. In the Middle Ages, love was not a gift but a gamble, a force both feared and worshipped, mocked and mourned, and through every story, you felt the same refrain. Love was never safe. Desire bound people together, yet it also tore them apart. It inspired poetry, yet it provoked executions. It brought laughter at festivals and tears in confessionals. Picture the lives you've glimpsed along this path. The noblewoman gazing from her window, trapped in silks, the peasant carving a spoon as a secret gift, the runaway lovers clutching each other in the cold woods, the troubadour strumming under torchlight, voice quivering with forbidden hope, all of them tangled in a web that declared their hearts dangerous. And yet, desire endured. No chain silenced it completely. No sermon smothered it forever. Even when families arranged marriages like business contracts. Even when priests thundered from pulpits. Even when swords clashed over jealousy or courts shredded vows, love kept slipping through. Stubborn as wild grass between stones. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly lived so haunted, or whether these nightmares are exaggerated by the records. But the persistence of their stories whispers the truth. Love survived. Even in cages. Now, the rhythm of this tale slows. The torches of scandal dim. The voices of troubadours fade into soft echoes. You find yourself not in a courtroom or a battlefield, but in a quiet medieval chamber. Candlelight flickering against wooden beams. The night air hums low, steady, like a lullaby woven from centuries of longing. You can almost hear the breathing of those who once dared to love. Each side drifting into history like smoke. Rest here a moment. Let the edges of those harsh images blur, the jeers of crowds. The clang of duels, the endless sermons of sin. Feel them dissolve into softer shadows. Like dreams slipping away at dawn. What lingers is not the cruelty, but the persistence. The courage of hearts that reached for each other anyway. Even when the cost was shame, exile, or death, people still chose to risk it. Because what is life without the flicker of being seen, being held, being loved? The nightmare softens further now. The stone walls grow hazy. The heavy laws blur into mist. What remains is only the thrum of humanity, the same heartbeat you carry tonight. Their fears are gone, their punishments vanished, but their longing endures in echoes. Passed down through poems, songs, and stories. Let yourself drift with them. The night is calm, the fan hums softly, the lights are low, each breath steadies you, each word stretches slower, softer, further apart. The nightmare of medieval desire becomes only a distant whisper. Fading with the centuries, what remains is gentleness, quiet, rest. And now, as the last candle flickers out, let yourself sink fully into silence. The story is finished, the hearts are at peace, and you are safe. End of script. Sweet dreams.